He called at 7 in the morning, in a voice that didn't leave room for questions. He wasn't supposed to fall in love. He called at 7 in the morning, in a voice that didn't leave room for questions. "Sophia, I'm coming to get you in an hour. Pack only what you need." It wasn't a request. It never was. My father had spent 20 years telling people what to do, and I think he'd forgotten a long time ago that I wasn't one of his employees. An hour for what? Dad? I have a lecture at 9. His voice dropped, and that scared me more than yelling ever could. "Someone left a note on the office door this morning, with your name on it." I didn't ask what it said. Something in the way he paused before saying that told me I didn't want to know. My father built his empire on shipping contracts and quiet deals in rooms I was never invited into. I'd spent my whole life being the daughter who didn't ask questions, who smiled at galas and stayed out of the parts of his world that smelled like danger. Apparently, that arrangement had an expiration date, and it had just quietly passed. I packed in 11 minutes. A change of clothes, my laptop, the charger I could never find when I needed it. My hands were steady. My mind was not. 3 hours later, I was standing in an empty penthouse on the 40th floor of a building I hadn't even known my father owned. Everything in it was new and untouched. Furniture that still smelled like the showroom, blinds that had never been opened enough to fade. It wasn't a home. It was a box built to keep something safe. And in the middle of it, by the window, stood a man like he owned the air itself. He was tall, too tall to seem accidental in a room. Black jacket, collar up despite the heat outside, forearms marked with scars he didn't bother to hide. He didn't turn when I walked in. He just said,
"Lock the door behind you."
"Excuse me?"
The door. Lock it. Rule number 1.
I crossed my arms, mostly to stop them from shaking. "And who exactly are you?" That's when he finally turned. His eyes were steel gray, and they looked at me like he already knew every decision I was about to make before I made it myself.
Gabriel Cross, your father hired me to protect you until the threat situation is resolved.
Situation. I laughed, bitter and a little too loud. "You're calling my life a situation?"
I'm calling it a job. What you call it isn't my concern.
That coldness in his voice should have insulted me. Instead, I felt something uncomfortably close to curiosity, the kind that gets people in trouble. I studied him the way you study weather that's about to turn. The set of his shoulders, the way his weight sat perfectly balanced on both feet, like he could move in any direction without warning. The way his gaze never quite left the window even while he spoke to me. Everything about him seemed built for a version of the world I'd only glimpsed in my father's old case files, back when I was young enough to think those stories were exciting instead of a warning. "How long am I supposed to live here?"
Until we find out who sent the note. Could be a week, could be a month.
"And you're planning to stay here too? In my apartment?"
I sleep outside your door, not in it. There's a difference.
Something about the way he said it, with no hint of a joke, no attempt to soften it, made me believe he'd actually do exactly that, every single night, without complaint. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had told me all day. That evening, he walked me through what he called the rules, standing with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, like a soldier giving orders he'd given 100 times before.
No unscheduled outings. If you need to leave this apartment, I clear it first. No calls on unsecured lines. You use the phone I give you. You don't open the door for anyone, including people you know, especially people you know.
I have a thesis defense in 3 weeks. I have friends who are going to notice if I disappear.
Then we schedule around it, but the rules don't bend because your calendar is inconvenient.
You do realize I'm a person, not cargo.
His eyes flicked to mine, something unreadable passing behind them. I'm aware. Cargo doesn't argue with me.
I wanted to throw something at him. Instead, I turned and walked to my room and shut the door harder than I needed to. Through the wall, I swore I heard him go very still. Not offended, exactly. Just noticing. Cataloging. The way he seemed to catalog everything. Over the next 2 days, I watched him the way you watch a storm you can't outrun. He moved through the apartment like it was a chessboard, always aware of angles. Which chair let him see the door, which window had a sightline from the street, which shadows lingered too long outside. He barely spoke, 10 words a day, maybe less, And yet I found myself cataloging him back, the faint scar that cut through one eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when his phone buzzed with updates he didn't share with me, the fact that he never once sat with his back exposed to a door. He was a machine built to notice everything, except, apparently, how much I'd started noticing him too. The second day, restlessness got the better of me, and I asked him, half daring him to refuse, to teach me something useful. If I was going to live surrounded by armed men and shattered peace of mind, I didn't want to be the only person in the room who couldn't do anything if it came to that.
You want me to teach you to fight?
I want you to teach me not to freeze. There's a difference. Something in that answer seemed to satisfy him, because he set down whatever he'd been reading and stood, rolling his shoulders like a man settling into familiar work. He walked me through the basics in the empty space of the living room: how to break a wrist grip, how to use an opponent's weight against them, how to find the door in a room without ever looking like you were searching for it.
Weight on the balls of your feet, never flat. Flat-footed is how people end up on the ground.
You say that like you've seen it happen.
I've caused it to happen. Different lesson for a different day.
When he adjusted my stance, his hands were impersonal, professional, a fraction too careful, like a man handling something breakable he refused to admit was breakable. But when his palm settled briefly against my lower back to correct my balance, neither of us moved for a beat too long, and I felt something crackle in the air between us that had nothing to do with self-defense.
Again, he said, voice rougher than before, stepping back like the contact had cost him something.
We didn't talk about that pause, but I noticed he kept his distance a little more carefully for the rest of the lesson, as if he'd caught himself somewhere he wasn't supposed to be standing. On the third night, I decided if I was going to be a prisoner in my own life, I could at least cook a real meal instead of the takeout containers piling up in the recycling. I made too much pasta because cooking for one when you're used to cooking for a household never quite calibrates right. When I set a plate in front of him, he looked at it like it was a foreign object.
You didn't have to do that.
I know. Eat it anyway. He did, slowly, like a man unused to being served anything that wasn't a threat assessment. I took the opening while it was there. Do you have family? Somewhere worrying about you while you babysit me? Something flickered across his face. Quick, involuntary, gone before I could name it. For a second, the careful control slipped, and underneath it was something raw, something that looked almost like grief.
No, he said, not anymore.
He didn't elaborate. I didn't push, but I filed it away, next to the scars and the silence, as one more piece of a man who was clearly built from something broken and rebuilt into a weapon. We finished the meal in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't hostile either, something new, something neither of us had a name for yet. When I stood to clear the plates, his hand caught mine for half a second, just long enough to take the dish from me instead.
I'll do it. You cooked.
It was such a small thing, a man offering to wash a plate, and yet it undid something in me that 4 days of careful hostility hadn't managed to touch. I went to bed that night replaying it, annoyed at myself for how much weight I'd given to something so ordinary. The fourth night, I couldn't sleep. I went down to the kitchen for water and found him at the table, a handgun disassembled in neat pieces in front of him, cleaning it with the same care someone might use polishing silverware. Do you ever sleep? He didn't look up. I sleep when it's safe to sleep. And is it ever safe? Now he looked up. Something moved behind those steel eyes, something that clearly didn't want to be there, but had stopped being able to hide.
Not in my line of work, no.
I sat down across from him, even though every instinct told me not to. Why did you choose this? Spending your life protecting people who barely notice you exist? He was quiet long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer.
Because once, I didn't protect someone who mattered. I've spent every year since making sure that never happens again.
Who was it? His hands stilled on the gun. Someone I don't get to talk about. Not yet. You were military before this, weren't you? It wasn't really a question, and he seemed to know it. He set the gun's frame down with the same care he'd given every piece of it.
Special operations, 6 years, then private contract work, then this.
What made you leave?
The job I told you about. I was supposed to protect one person on an assignment that wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It became dangerous. I made a call that seemed right at the time. It wasn't.
And you've been trying to make that call differently ever since. He looked at me for a long moment, like I'd said something that landed closer to the truth than he was ready for.
Every single time, he said quietly.
I wanted to ask more, but something in his face told me that door wasn't opening tonight, and pushing it further would cost me whatever fragile trust had just been built between us. So instead, I just said, "For what it's worth, I don't think you're the kind of man who fails people twice." He looked at me like I'd said something dangerous.
You don't know that.
"No," I admitted, "but I'm starting to think I want to." Neither of us said anything else that night, but something had shifted, quiet and undeniable, like a door left open half an inch. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying the way his voice had softened around the edges when he said someone I don't get to talk about. Not yet, not yet. As if there might come a time when he would. As if he'd already decided, somewhere underneath all that discipline, that I might eventually be someone he'd trust with it. The next morning, he was different. Not warmer exactly, but less guarded, like a wall had been lowered by an inch, and neither of us was going to mention it. He made coffee without being asked, and left a cup by my door, still warm, before disappearing to run his morning perimeter check. It was such a small gesture. I stood there holding it longer than I needed to, feeling something dangerously close to hope. That afternoon, restless and needing to feel like I still had some control over my own life, I called my father on the secure phone Gabriel had given me. I hadn't planned to ask about Daniel. It slipped out anyway, prompted by nothing I could name, maybe some instinct I didn't yet have words for. "Dad, this is going to sound strange, but is there anything about what happened to Daniel that you never told me?" The silence on the other end lasted a beat too long to be nothing. "Why would you ask me that?" His voice had gone carefully flat, the same tone he used in negotiations when he already knew he'd lost ground. "No reason. Forget it. Sophia." A pause, heavier this time. "Whatever Gabriel Cross has told you, you let me handle it. That's not a conversation for the phone." He hung up before I could answer, and I sat there staring at the phone, cold settling somewhere under my ribs. My father didn't dodge questions. He redirected them, reframed them, negotiated around them, but he never simply refused to answer. Until now. 5 days in, I broke the first rule. My father's company was hosting a charity gala, the kind of event where absence would raise more questions than my presence ever could, and where I refused to let whoever sent that note take one more piece of my life than they'd already stolen. Gabriel argued against it for exactly 4 minutes before realizing I wasn't going to lose that fight.
If we do this, you do exactly what I say, exactly when I say it. No exceptions.
Fine.
I mean it, Sophia. Tonight, I'm not your bodyguard standing in the corner. I'm the reason you make it home.
Something about the way he said my name, like it cost him something, made my breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The gala was all crystal and candlelight, and the kind of forced elegance my father's world specialized in. Gabriel stayed close the entire night, his hand a steady, grounding pressure at the small of my back, positioning his body between me and every room we entered like it was choreography he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. I noticed the way his eyes swept every face, cataloging threats the way other men cataloged exits at a party. I also noticed the way, every few minutes, his gaze found its way back to me, not scanning, not assessing, just looking. I'd been to 100 events like this one, and I knew the choreography by heart. The practiced small talk, the way my father's associates measured me for what I could do for them, the champagne that never quite ran out. But I'd never attended one with a man like Gabriel at my side, and the difference rewired the entire evening. Where I used to feel like a decoration in these rooms, tonight I felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with the dress I was wearing. Halfway through the evening, I felt it before I understood it. A prickling awareness of being watched, wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the usual admiration of a crowded room. A man near the bar, unfamiliar, his attention fixed on me a beat too long. Gabriel felt it too. I watched him clock the man in half a second, his entire posture shifting from charming escort to something coiled and precise.
We're leaving, now. Smile, take my arm, don't look back at him.
I did exactly as he said, my heart hammering, his hand firm and warm at my waist, as he guided me through the crowd with an ease that made it look like nothing was wrong at all. Only once we were in the car did I let myself shake. Who was that?
I don't know yet, but he knew exactly who you were, and he wanted us to know he was watching.
Back at the penthouse, adrenaline curdled into something sharper. I rounded on him the second the door closed. You can't keep doing this. Treating every room like a war zone. Treating me like something breakable.
Because you almost were breakable tonight, and you don't even understand how close that man could have gotten before I clocked him.
So what? I just stop living? Stop existing until someone decides I'm allowed to again?
His control cracked, just slightly, his voice rising for the first time since I'd met him. I can't afford to lose focus around you, Sophia. Not for 1 second. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what it's costing me to keep drawing a line I have no business drawing?
The room went very quiet. Neither of us moved. What line? I asked, quieter now. He didn't answer. He just looked at me like a man standing at the edge of something he knew he shouldn't jump into, and wanted to anyway. You're allowed to say it, you know, I said, quieter now, some of the anger draining out of my voice. Whatever it is you keep almost saying and then don't.
It's not that simple.
Nothing about this week has been simple. Might as well add one more thing to the pile. For a second, I thought he might actually answer. Instead, he exhaled, long and controlled, like a man forcing a door shut against his own better judgment.
Get some rest, Sophia. Tomorrow's going to be long, whether either of us wants it to be or not.
He was right, though neither of us could have known exactly how long. That night, the storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked hard enough to rattle the windows, and the power went out completely, plunging the penthouse into a darkness broken only by the flash of lightning and the dim glow of the emergency lights along the floor. I found Gabriel in the living room, a flashlight in hand, checking the perimeter with the same methodical calm he brought to everything. Is this normal? The power?
Citywide outage. Storm knocked out 3 substations. Nothing to do with us.
Somehow, that didn't stop my pulse from racing. We ended up sitting on the floor by the window, watching lightning fracture the sky over the water, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. Neither of us reached for the flashlight again. There was something about the dark that made the silence between us feel less like distance, and more like an invitation neither of us had the courage to name. You're not what I expected, I said eventually. When my father said bodyguard, I pictured someone who talked in grunts and stood in corners.
A ghost of something that might have been a smile passed over his face, gone as quickly as it came. Disappointed?
Terrified, actually. Grunting men in corners are easier to ignore. Tell me something true, I said. Just one thing. Not about the job. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that felt like a decision being made.
I used to think caring about someone made you weak, made you predictable, gave people leverage over you.
Used to? He turned to look at me then, and in the flash of lightning, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not the bodyguard, not the weapon. Just a man.
Used to.
The space between us had somehow disappeared. I could feel his breath, see the exact moment his eyes dropped to my mouth, and then, deliberately, forced themselves back up. His hand rose, like it had a will of its own, fingers grazing my jaw with a gentleness that didn't match anything else about him.
Rule number 1.
He never finished it. Instead, he pulled back, sharp and sudden, like a man yanking his hand from a flame, putting distance between us with something that looked almost like panic.
I can't.
Gabriel.
I need to check the perimeter.
He was gone before I could say anything else, leaving me sitting alone in the dark with my heart pounding and the ghost of his fingers still warm against my jaw. The power came back an hour later. Neither of us mentioned what almost happened, but something had changed, and we both knew it, even if neither of us was ready to say it out loud. 2 days after that, everything accelerated. Gabriel's phone rang at 3 a.m., not his usual security line, but a number he clearly hadn't expected. I woke to the sound of his voice, low and urgent, through the wall. By the time I came out of my room, his face had gone the kind of still that scared me more than anger ever could. What is it?
We have a name. Whoever's behind the threats, they're not a stranger to your family. This goes back further than your father's current business.
How much further? He hesitated, and in a man who never hesitated, that told me everything.
Years. Possibly connected to something that happened before you were even old enough to understand what your father's world really was.
My stomach turned to ice. 12 years ago, I'd been a child obsessed with horses and boy bands, oblivious to whatever version of my father's world had been quietly unraveling behind closed doors. The idea that it had already been reaching for me back then, long before I understood any of it, made the apartment feel suddenly much smaller than its floor-to-ceiling windows suggested. That's not an answer.
I know. I need more before I say it out loud. I won't be wrong about something like this.
I didn't get the chance to push further. That's when the living room window shattered. Everything happened at once. The sound of glass exploding inward, Gabriel moving before I'd even processed the noise. My bedroom door thrown open with him already positioned between me and the doorway. Gun drawn, body a wall between me and whatever was out there.
Don't move.
His voice was different now, low, fast, none of the careful control from before. This wasn't the man who'd hesitated in the dark during the storm. This was the man my father had been paying for, and for the first time, I understood exactly why. What's happening?
Someone just tried to come through the living room window, didn't get in, but he didn't try to be quiet either, which means...
He cut himself off, listening to something I couldn't hear, and then grabbed my arm with a speed that left no room for questions.
It means he wanted us to see it. This was a warning, not an attempt.
A warning about what? He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something that looked like fear. Not for himself, I realized, but for me.
That you belong to them, and that they want me to know it.
Within the hour, we were packing to move to a location he refused to name out loud, even inside the apartment. He moved with brutal efficiency, sweeping through rooms, collecting documents, disabling the exact devices he'd installed himself days earlier. I followed him toward the door, my mind still spinning from the shattered glass, from the warning, from the weight of everything he wasn't telling me. Gabriel, the name. You said you needed more before you'd say it, but I think I've earned the right to know what's coming. He stopped at the door, hand on the frame, and for a long moment, he didn't turn around. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something quiet, almost hollow, the voice of a man about to open a door he'd kept locked for a very long time.
12 years ago, I was assigned to protect someone. A kid, barely more than a teenager. I failed. He died, or that's what everyone believed, including me, for 12 years.
My chest tightened. Believed?
He finally turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made the floor feel unsteady beneath me. His name was Daniel Hart.
The name hit me like the window shattering all over again. My hands went numb around the bag I was holding. My voice broke. That's my brother's name. My brother died in an accident when I was 16. There was a funeral. I have his ashes in my father's house. Gabriel's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Grief, guilt, and something else I couldn't name yet.
Sophia, I don't think your brother is dead, and I think whoever's coming after you now already knows exactly where he's been for the last 12 years.
The room tilted. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about the boy I'd grieved for over a decade, cracked open in a single sentence. I remembered the funeral. Closed casket, my father's face carved from stone, my mother's hand shaking so hard around mine that her rings left marks in my skin. I remembered believing, with the absolute certainty only a 16-year-old can have, that some pain simply doesn't get smaller, it just gets carried differently. And now this man, this stranger who'd slept outside my door for a week, was telling me I'd carried it for a lie. How? I whispered. How could you not tell me the second you suspected?
Because I needed to be sure before I put that kind of weight on you. Some truths you only get to say once, and I needed to say it right.
How long have you known? Really known? Not suspected?
3 days. I've spent 3 days trying to find a way to tell you that wouldn't break something in you that I wasn't sure could be put back together.
And you decided now was the right time?
No. I decided I'd run out of the right time to wait for. His jaw tightened, something raw moving under the careful control. I know what it's like to carry a death that isn't real. I've done it for 12 years. I wasn't going to let you carry it one day longer than I had to.
For a moment, the anger in me softened into something closer to grief. For both of us, for the years we'd each spent grieving a boy who might have been alive the entire time, hidden behind a lie neither of us had chosen. Where is he? Right now, tonight. Do you know?
I have a location. I was going to take you there myself, once it was secure. Once I was sure it wasn't a trap.
And is it? Secure? He didn't answer fast enough, and that silence told me everything his words hadn't. I opened my mouth to answer him, to demand every detail he had, to scream, to cry. I didn't even know which, but before a single word could leave my throat, the lights in the penthouse cut out completely, plunging us both into darkness, and somewhere below us, I heard the unmistakable sound of the elevator beginning to rise. If you want to know what happens next, hit subscribe. Soul Chronicles brings you a new part every week. Part 2 is coming soon.